Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Leviticus chapter 4, verse 1 through chapter 5, verse 19. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, when a person sins by straying unintentionally from any of the Lord's commandments, which must not be violated, and violates any one of them, if the high priest sins so that the people are guilty on account of the sin he has committed, he must present a flawless young bull to the Lord for a sin offering. He must bring the bull to the entrance of the meeting tent before the Lord, lay his hand on the head of the bull, and slaughter the bull before the Lord. Then that high priest must take some of the blood of the bull and bring it to the meeting tent. The priest must dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of it 7 times before the Lord toward the front of the veil canopy of the sanctuary. The priest must put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense that is before the Lord in the meeting tent, and all the rest of the bull's blood he must pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering that is at the entrance of the meeting tent. Then he must take up all the fat from the sin offering bowl, the fat covering the entrails and all the fat surrounding the entrails, the 2 kidneys with the fat on their sinews, and the protruding lobe on the liver, which he is to remove along with the kidneys, just as it is taken from the ox of the peace offering sacrifice, and the priest must offer them up in smoke on the altar of burnt offering. But the hide of the bull, all its flesh, along with its head and its legs, its entrails and its dung, all the rest of the bull, he must bring outside the camp to a ceremonially clean place, to the fatty ash pile, and he must burn it on a wood fire. It must be burned on the fatty ash pile. If the whole congregation of Israel strays unintentionally, and the matter is not noticed by the assembly, and they violate one of the Lord's commandments, which must not be violated, so they become guilty, the assembly must present a young bull for a sin offering. When the sin they have committed becomes known, they must bring it before the meeting tent. The elders of the congregation must lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord, and someone must slaughter the bull before the Lord. Then the high priest must bring some of the blood of the bull to the meeting tent. And that priest must dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord toward the front of the veil canopy. He must put some of the blood on the horns of the altar, which is before the Lord, in the meeting tent, and all the rest of the blood he must pour out at the base of the altar of burnt offering that is at the entrance of the meeting tent. Then the priest must take all its fat and offer the fat up in smoke on the altar. He must do with the rest of the bull, just as he did with the bull of the sin offering. This is what he must do with it. So the priest will make atonement on their behalf, and they will be forgiven. He must bring the rest of the bull outside the camp, and burn it just as he burned the first bull. It is the sin offering of the assembly. Whenever a leader, by straying unintentionally, sins, and violates one of the commandments of the Lord his God, which must not be violated, and he pleads guilty, or a sin that he committed is made known to him, he must bring a flawless male goat as his offering. He must lay his hand on the head of the male goat, and slaughter it in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered, before the Lord. It is a sin offering. Then the priest must take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger, and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and he must pour out the rest of its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. Then the priest must offer up all of its fat in smoke on the altar, like the fat of the peace offering sacrifice. So the priest will make atonement on his behalf for a sin, and he will be forgiven. If an ordinary individual sins by straying unintentionally when he violates one of the Lord's commandments, which must not be violated, and he pleads guilty, or a sin that he committed is made known to him, he must bring a flawless female goat as his offering for the sin that he committed. He must lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and slaughter the sin offering in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. Then the priest must take some of its blood with his finger, and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and he must pour out all the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. Then he must remove all of its fat, just as the fat was removed from the peace offering sacrifice, and the priest must offer it up in smoke on the altar for a soothing aroma to the Lord. So the priest will make atonement on his behalf, and he will be forgiven. But if he brings a sheep as his offering, for a sin offering, he must bring a flawless female. He must lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, and slaughter it for a sin offering in the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered. Then the priest must take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and he must pour out all the rest of its blood at the base of the altar. Then the one who brought the offering must remove all its fat, just as the fat of the sheep is removed from the peace offering sacrifice, and the priest must offer them up in smoke on the altar, on top of all the other gifts of the Lord. So the priest will make atonement on his behalf for his sin which he has committed, and he will be forgiven. When a person sins, in that he hears a public curse against one who fails to testify, and he is a witness, he either saw or knew what had happened, and he does not make it known, then he will bear his punishment for his iniquity. Or when there is a person who touches anything ceremonially unclean, whether the carcass of an unclean wild animal, or the carcass of an unclean domesticated animal, or the carcass of an unclean creeping thing, even if he did not realize it, but he himself has become unclean and is guilty, or when he touches human uncleanness with regard to anything by which he can become unclean, even if he did not realize it, but he himself has later come to know it, and is guilty, or when a person swears an oath, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips, whether to do evil or to do good, with regard to anything which the individual might speak thoughtlessly in an oath, even if he did not realize it, but he himself has later come to know it, and is guilty with regards to one of these oaths. When an individual becomes guilty with regard to one of these things, he must confess how he has sinned, and he must bring his penalty for guilt to the Lord for his sin that he has committed, a female from the flock, whether a female sheep or a female goat, for a sin offering, so the priest will make atonement on his behalf for his sin. If he cannot afford an animal from the flock, he must bring his penalty for guilt for his sin that he has committed, 2 turtle doves, or 2 young pigeons to the Lord, one for a sin offering, and one for a burnt offering. He must bring them to the priest, and present first the one that is for a sin offering. The priest must pinch its head at the nape of its neck, but must not sever the head from the body. Then he must sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering on the wall of the altar, and the remainder of the blood must be squeezed out at the base of the altar. It is a sin offering. The second bird he must make a burnt offering according to the standard regulation, so the priest will make atonement on behalf of this person for his sin which he has committed, and he will be forgiven. If he cannot afford 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, he must bring as his offering for his sin which he has committed 1/10 of an ephah of choice wheat flour for a sin offering. He must not place olive oil on it, and he must not put frankincense on it, because it is a sin offering. He must bring it to the priest, and the priest must scoop out from it a handful as its memorial portion, and offer it up in smoke on the altar on top of the other gifts of the Lord. It is a sin offering. So the priest will make atonement on his behalf for his sin which he has committed by doing one of these things, and he will be forgiven. The remainder of the offering will belong to the priest, like the grain offering. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, when a person commits a trespass and sins by straying unintentionally from the regulations about the Lord's holy things, then he must bring his penalty for guilt to the Lord, a flawless ram from the flock, convertible into silver shekels according to the standard of the sanctuary shekel for a guilt offering. And whatever holy thing he violated, he must restore, and must add 1/5 to it, and give it to the priest. So the priest will make atonement on his behalf with a guilt offering ram, and he will be forgiven. If a person sins and violates one of the Lord's commandments, which must not be violated, although he did not know it at the time, but later realizes he is guilty, then he will bear his punishment for iniquity, and must bring a flawless ram from the flock, convertible into silver shekels, for a guilt offering to the priest. So the priest will make atonement on his behalf for his error which he committed, although he himself had not known it, and he will be forgiven. It is a guilt offering. He was surely guilty before the Lord. Okay. Despite reading through this several times, I'm never quite sure what the individual sacrifices are for. I know that this last chapter described the sin offerings, but all of those sin offerings were for sin committed unintentionally. That is in Leviticus 4, verse 2. When a person sins by straying unintentionally from any of the Lord's commandments, which must not be violated, and violates any one of them. So, yeah, and as far as I know, there was no offering that one could offer for intentionally committed sin. That's why in Romans chapter 4, you have, I think I'm quoting David, saying, "Blessed is the man whose sin is forgiven, whose rebellious sin you no longer look at," or something to that effect. The idea being that you have these two types of sins. One that is unintentionally committed because the person was unaware of the regulation concerning his behavior, and one that's intentionally committed. Yeah, so yeah, you have that being said, you certainly have instances of people committing intentional sin throughout the Old Testament, like David numbering the people when he knew full well that it was prohibited within the law, and it even being laid out to him by his military commander, who was a bloodthirsty man, not Uriah. I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, there are instances where God forgave that intentional sin, but it was only by his mercy that he would do so. Also, you have the law of guilt offerings here. When a person sins, in that he hears a public curse against one who fails to testify, and he is a witness, and he does not make it known, then he will bear his punishment for iniquity. So I think this is partially why Jesus responded to the high priest's adjuration when the high priest adjured Jesus by asking him, "Are you the son of God, the Christ?" And Jesus responds to him, because it would have been sin otherwise, because he heard a public curse. That is this by the living God, this adjuration with an oath associated to it. If he didn't respond, then he would have been guilty of sin, according to Leviticus 5:1. Carrying on, Mark chapter 2, verse 13 through chapter 3, verse 6. Jesus went out again by the sea. The whole crowd came to him, and he taught them. As he went along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. "Follow me," he said to him, and he got up and followed him. As Jesus was having a meal in Levi's home, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the experts in the law and the Pharisees saw that he was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard this, he said to them, "Those who are healthy don't need a physician, but those who are sick do. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting, so they came to Jesus and said, "Why do the disciples of John and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples don't fast?" Jesus said to them, "The wedding guests cannot fast while the bridegroom is with them, can they? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they do not fast. But the days are coming when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and at that time they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, otherwise the patch pulls away from it, the new from the old, and the tear becomes worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the wine will burst the skins, and both the wine and the skins will be destroyed. Instead, new wine is poured into new wineskins. Jesus was going through the grain fields on a Sabbath, and his disciples began to pick some heads of wheat as they made their way. So the Pharisees said to him, Look, why are they doing what is against the law on the Sabbath? He said to them, Have you never read what David did when he was in need, and he and his companions were hungry? How he entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest, and ate the sacred bread, which is against the law for any but the priests to eat, and also gave it to his companions? Then he said to them, The Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. For this reason, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Then Jesus entered the synagogue again, and a man who was there who had a withered hand. They watched Jesus closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath, so they could accuse him. So he said to the man who had the withered hand, Stand up among all these people. Then he said to them, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath, or evil, to save a life, or destroy it? But they were silent. After looking around at them in anger, grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. So the Pharisees went out immediately and began plotting with the Herodians as to how they could assassinate him. Interesting. How I didn't realize the poignancy of Jesus' question until now. In Mark 3:4, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or evil, to save a life or destroy it? And then what happens next? In 3:5, Jesus says, Stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The man's life was saved. And then what did they do? Mark 3:6. The Pharisees went out immediately and began plotting with the Herodians as to how they could assassinate him. That is, to destroy life. So they immediately began their work to assassinate Jesus for the reason that he saved a life on the Sabbath. So, oh my. How short-sighted we can be. Yeah, just putting aside the, oh goodness. Putting aside the miraculous event, they're plotting to kill Jesus and assassinate him, which, conspiring sounds like work to me. So they were really pounding the Sabbath thing. In the end of Mark 2, his disciples were going through the field and picking heads of wheat. And the Pharisees were upset about that. And yeah, because you have, I think even today, just this general ban on doing anything on the Sabbath, even preparing food for yourself. So, yeah. They gave the regulation a higher place than it needed to be. Because, as Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. That is, people would always drive their slaves even on 24/7. Well, I mean, as much as they could. And this was as much for them as for anything else. Carrying on. Psalm 36, verses 1 through 12. An evil man is rebellious to the core. He does not fear God, for he is too proud to recognize and give up his sin. The words he speaks are sinful and deceitful. He does not care about doing what is wise and right. He plans ways to sin while he lies in his bed. He is committed to a sinful lifestyle. He does not reject what is evil. O Lord, your loyal love reaches to the sky, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your justice is like the highest mountain, your fairness like the deepest sea. You preserve mankind in the animal kingdom. How precious is your love, O God! The human race finds shelter under your wings. They are filled with food from your house, and you allow them to drink from the river of your delicacies. For you are the one who gives and sustains life. Extend your loyal love to your faithful followers, and vindicate the morally upright. Do not let arrogant men overtake me, or let evil men make me homeless. I can see the evildoers. They have fallen. They have been knocked down and are unable to get up. And finally, Proverbs 10, verses 1 and 2. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise child makes a father rejoice, but a foolish child is a grief to his mother. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from mortal danger. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.